Hey, what's up? Uh, Today I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of share my Grixis build that I've been playing in the modern format. It mirrors quite a bit with my historic deck that I've been trying out. Granted, it's not exactly the same list, but shares a lot of similarities. I would say this deck is definitely a lot quicker. Uh, doesn't have as much of a tough time as aggro. Uh, Well, I guess it still does, but aggro in my deck is a little, or aggro in my meta is a little different compared to what I play on online. Aggro in my deck, or in my meta, I should say, a lot of people go for sort of a tall aggro rather than wide, and a lot of my card choices in this particular deck kind of reflects that. And so I'll kind of go ahead and go over my deck. Hopefully, it'll be a little bit quicker video, but I tend to ramble on quite a bit, so hopefully we'll see. Alright, so let's just go ahead and get started. So here you go. The first card I'm playing is Lightning Bolts. So if you're playing red, you should probably be playing Lightning Bolts. They're a really good removal spell. It's format defining. It literally decides what creatures can be played and what creatures cannot be played. Um, you know, that sort of thing. So that being said, I'm only playing 3 copies because, as I mentioned, a lot of um, decks and or a lot of people in my um, meta local area, they tend to play really not really super wide, like like in Mono Green Elves where they have like 5 creatures on the board, and you gotta deal with that. They play more like really tall aggro, I guess. So something like Lurus, Death Shadow, Lurus Jun, stuff like that, where they got Death Shadows or Sky Enclave, or maybe a Murktide, or even a Primeval Titan, Varanacross, stuff like that, where it's a little too large to deal with, and some of that stuff they get out kind of early on the board because of either they're playing a big mana deck or they're trying to cheat it out. And so uh, Lightning Bolt definitely doesn't really deal with that. Another thing is that not too many players in my local play Planeswalker, which is what I would generally use this card to remove. If they are playing something like a Lily or Ren in 7 or Ren in 6, sorry, that I don't come across that much. Most of the time, this card is very good against anything that's playing Lurus. But at the same time, my meta seems to be split between the 50-50 where they go Lurus and they go kind of wide, but not really. But with Lurus, they kind of go the big, tall Lurus where they are casting Death Shadow for like 7 or Sky Enclave for like 8 or something really big where Bolt just doesn't quite answer that. However, it does answer Darcy and Ragavans, which is really nice, which is why I think you still need this card to kind of hit those particular creatures. Lightning bolts are really good against elementals. Most elementals they only got 3 health, so this is really good against them. So there's still an argument where you can play more than 3 copies. But just in my general meta, they weren't that helpful, so that's why I'm only playing 3 rather than 4. Uh, but yeah, you can just change this based off of how your locals are. Um, what I like about the next card is the Fatal Pushes, which does very similar things to Lightning Bolt. It answers really small creatures, and it also answers big, tall creatures that are cheap. So like your Death Shadows, for example, spend 1 mana, hit their Death Shadow, or hit whatever, or you can even answer things that are 4 mana and lower. And triggering Revolt in this deck is not too difficult. I'm playing 8 fetches, and I'm playing Snapcasters. I'm playing whatchamacallit, Croxas. So there's plenty of ways to try to trigger the Revolt, and so definitely a lot easier to trigger Revolt in this deck than it is in, say, my Esper deck. Uh, what I mentioned, like with Snapcasters, sometimes what I'll do is I'll flash in the Snap, block with it, or give this flashback, block with the Snap, and when Snap dies, it'll trigger the Revolt, and then you just use that to remove. The thing with um, Modern in general is that anything with that costs 5 mana or higher, creature-wise, generally has a sort of like a hex-proof sort of thing. Um, and so you'll see some cards in my deck later that kind of deal with that. What I mean by hexproof is that cards like Fatal, cards like Lightning Bolt, cheap removal like that cannot answer, those creatures that are usually 5 mana and bigger, because they're usually are either more health than three, or obviously they're 5 CMC, so Fatal Push cannot really even touch it. So, but it is still one of my favorite removal cards. The Fatal Pushes. I use it to protect my Planeswalkers. Being 1 mana, I use it to obviously to protect my health total, and in general, in my meta, people don't really go wide, so the 1-for-1 removal is generally pretty good. The widest they'll go is maybe if they're playing Crashing Foothills or something like that. They'll have the card that was it Charlotte's Agent or something like that, and they'll have like the two rhinos. That's as wide as they'll go, at least in my meta. Maybe they'll have like two Darcy, or maybe something like that, where I don't think playing a sweeper is really worth it. So in this particular build, I opt to play not any sweepers in the main. I opted to play a lot of the 1-for-1 removal, trying to maintain board control with cards like this, rather than waiting for big value and sweeping my opponent with a 4 mana sweeper like Damnation, or maybe a Languish or something like that. On top of that, Black doesn't really have really good access to like all rounder sweepers. Damnation probably being the best of it, and maybe Extinction Event or Ritual of Soot or Languish are probably being the best choice of sweepers. You also have the choice of red sweepers, which honestly it's only Anger of the Gods that are really worth playing. I don't think there's any sweepers in the Rakdos color or the Mirror color, but yeah. So outside of that, that's why I opt to not really play any sweepers in this deck, and just try to 1-for-1 my opponent as best as possible. But I do play explosive engineering device and stuff like that. So that is what I would consider my sweeper, and I'll kind of go through that in a bit here. Next up, I play 4 Thoughtseizes. So this card has always been good. It's always been one of my favorite black cards. It allows us to, or at least early in the game, to deal with our opponent's threat. Anything that they might drop down to threaten us that we cannot answer with either removal or maybe a counter. In this particular deck, since I'm playing sort of a mid-range deck, I'm not really leaving my mana open all that often to play a counter spell, and I'll talk about that in a bit here. So I opted to try to play a sort of a hand disruption style deck, where I'm forcing my opponent to discard cards, things like that, getting value off of that, going for 1-for-1s or maybe even 2-for-1s occasionally, and kind of draining them of their resources, and trying to close out the game with Croxa or the Boluses, and these cards do help me get to that point. Pretty good against other counterspell decks or other control decks, because you can hit their counterspells for 1 mana, see what they have, see if it's safe to play your threats, or if you need to wait a few more turns before you can play their threats or your threats. So that's what's good about it. You're gonna opt to play Inquisitions instead, maybe 2 Inquisitions, 2 Thoughtseize, because they are quite painful to play, especially if you're playing in a very fast format like Modern, where there's a lot of aggro and weenies. Thoughtseize can be a little dangerous, especially if you're using this in combination with Snapcasters. You can be just pinging yourself down to almost like nothing, and you may just die to a lightning bolt. And there have been occasions where I've come pretty close to that, and I have died to lightning bolts before, like every modern player. But I think I'm just gonna go ahead and keep the 4 Thoughtseize here and swap them out when I need to, keep them in the main when I want to. Um, it's kind of similar to like the Whack 8 deck, where you're playing a bunch of just 1-for-1s, and then making sure your opponent really isn't getting their strategy off, making sure that they're just kind of top decking mode, and that's what we're trying to do with this deck, is try to get them into sort of a top decking mode, and then we can take control of the game using Croxa in our graveyard, or having a better top deck game than they do, which this deck generally does have a pretty decent top deck game. Um, our worst top decks are probably going to be removal spells and Thoughtseizes. Removal spells not the worst. You're gonna probably be answering them, their their threats with the removal spells, and the only other real worst top decks are Thoughtseizes if you're at that point. But everything else is generally pretty playable when you're top decking. And yeah, so our next card that we're playing is Consider. I would say this is one of my favorite opts or cantrip cards. Uh, for 1 mana, you can dump a card, you can do whatever. I like it better than Thought Scour because it does give you a choice. In this deck, I'm running very low land count. I'm running, I believe, only 21 lands, and so it might be very low for what the mana is in this deck. But I have a few other cards in this deck that kind of helps dig for lands and stuff like that, and so most of the time I'm okay with having a low land count and trying to essentially avoid flooding out most of the time, while also being consistent enough where I don't get land stuck. Um, this deck in overall, it has a pretty low curve. I would say I'm playing, I think, 15 1 mana spells and a bunch of other low mana spells. So the deck for the most part can function on 2 to 3 mana, which is fine. You won't be winning the game on 2 or 3 mana, but you should be able to function on it long enough to see your third, fourth land and be able to close out the game from there. It's a bit painful, like every time you're opening up with a 1 mana hand or 2 mana land hand, and but this deck can open up with like 1 or 2 lands and still function while disrupting your opponent and getting you to the stage where you can go to your mid game and try to either close out the game or continue to snowball your opponent with advantage. So you can play other cantrips, but I would say the best cantrips to play in this particular deck would either be Consider or Thought Scour, because I am playing Snapcasters and Croxas, and so both those cards really need your graveyard to be well developed in order to get maximum value out of them. And so these cards help that. If you don't need the land, you just dump the land. Maybe there's a spell like a Thoughtseize that you don't need right now, you can dump it into the graveyard. Flashback, a Snapcaster or something, cast the Thoughtseize, etc. So really like to Consider only over the Thought Scour. Long story short, because it gives you that choice. Thought Scour is still a really good card. I think Thought Scour is probably better in Murktide decks because you don't really care what you're drawing. Where this deck, you do kind of care about what you're drawing a little bit, because we're playing a low land base count, but still playing some pretty expensive cards. So needing that, giving you that decision is very important. I would even say I would rather play an Opt over Thought Scour in this particular deck, just because of that. But that might not be necessary with some of the other cards I play in this deck, and you'll see hopefully here. Next 2 cards I'm playing are the Croxa. They're essentially my kind of like my win con, and most of the time by the time I'm able to get this out, and sometimes even on turn 4 I'm able to go ahead and cast this. It's strong. It's usually a 2-for-1 card. If it sticks on the board, it will close out the game fairly quickly, and it just allows us to kind of abuse our graveyard, at least with game 1, until your opponent starts deciding graveyard hate, which this deck definitely does have bit of difficulties dealing with cards like um, Rest in Peace, or Spell Bomb, or maybe a Relic or something like that. Relics and Spell Bombs don't hurt too much because you can always rebuild your graveyards pretty quickly after they pop it. And you have cards in here like Kogan's Command to kind of force your opponent to kind of pop their or sacrifice the lanterns, their relics and stuff like that prematurely, which will then allow you to clear the way to repopulate your graveyard again and get some value off of Croxa and um, Snapcasters. Only issue is with enchantment based hate, so like Leyline of the Void and um, whatchamacallit, Rest in Peace, because we're playing Grixis color. We don't really have much interaction with um, enchantments. I mean, you have Feed the Swarm, but honestly, I don't think playing Feed the Swarm is really too good in this format. You're probably playing other removal spells. I mean, if Feed the Swarm was an instant or something, that'd be great. But yeah, your only other option is to maybe use something like EDD, an explosive engineering device, to kind of remove the enchantments. But I opt to say like, oh well, if they have that, if they have it, they have it. Whatever. We'll try to play around it. And I honestly don't need the grave to win that much, but it definitely, the resource from the grave definitely does help. I can still win off of my Boluses and my Planeswalker as the alternative win con. And so yeah, I feel 2 Croxas is fine. I think 3 or more, or more than 2 Croxa will clog your hand up, and you don't really want to see them too early. You want these to appear in your kind of your mid to late game, and I do play I think enough cards to kind of dig through my deck and consistently see the Croxas when I need to. One is maybe too little, and it might get removed or something, so you kind of want another one to back it up. But more than that might not be super necessary. Next card here for creatures and 2-mana creatures is going to be Snapcasters. So I'm only playing 3, namely because of Croxa here. So basically, I guess my reasoning is that they both are gonna eat up cards in your graveyard to either escape or to flashback, and so there are times when you aren't gonna have your grave that well developed, and if that's the case, you're gonna have to kind of pick between one or the other to use. And I would say more than I already explained, more than 2 Croxa. I definitely don't want to play more than 2 Croxa, but same thing with Mage here. I feel like more than 3 mages might get a little cloggy, might get a little clunky. If you're playing more cantrip cards, stuff like that, then I would say it's probably safe to play for snaps. But I'm only really playing technically 4 cantrips. I could probably up that number, but that remains to be seen. So I think 3 is fine. You want to see them, and you have ways of recycling this card too. I do play Kogan's Command, so Kogan's Command can always recycle this, so I don't think you need 4, because they are not going to be your primary win condition there. These Snapcasters are primarily here to kind of push you for advantage. You're going to be most likely dot seizing or considering off of these snaps just to get you that card advantage and to kind of 2-for-1 your opponent, versus using this as a control card. In my Esper deck, obviously I use Snapcaster as more of a control card and a win con. I flash him out, I counter a spell, he sticks on the board, and you just proceed to turn sideways with them, which is great. In this deck, I'm not really looking to turn sideways with Snapcasters as much. I'm looking to just try to get value off of him with my low mana card stuff, and hopefully if I need to use him as a blocker, use him as defense, and occasionally, yeah, you'll turn sideways with the snaps, and win off of that. But yeah, so just 3. And I guess if you feel the need for 4, you can bump it to 4. But I think that's 3 is an okay number. Next here is gonna be search for Skanta. This is kind of just a random choice. I mean, I like it in historic a lot in arena. It's been one of my favorite turn 2 plays is to play this and start filtering through your draw and getting what you need, and that's what's real intended purposes is to filter through your cards, fill up your graveyard, and use your graveyard as a resource, and go off from there. I don't think you're gonna really have the opportunity to really flip this card in modern as much, compared to my historic games where I can always kind of flip this and get value off of it by tapping it and searching my deck. Um, Here it's namely to kind of act as a cantrip, I guess, a 2 mana cantrip every turn. That I can get value out of it. It is weak to enchantment removals, and in modern there's quite a bit of that. And especially if you're gonna flip this over to become a land, you also want to make sure your opponent doesn't have some sort of Field of Ruins or Vindicate or something like that where they can remove this and you're not gonna get value off of it. Um, yeah, but generally this can be anything really. If you don't like Search for Skanta, it is a little bit of a slow card, and that's why I'm only playing one. You could play another Snapcaster, another land, maybe another cantrip, or more removal or something. So yeah, kind of just a flexible card. I haven't really got to test it out too much, but I am gonna start testing this deck pretty soon again. I stopped playing this deck just because I switched over to my Esper deck to try that out a couple of locals. So it's been a month or two since I played my Grixis deck, my initial draft of it. But yeah, I plan on taking this deck out again and going to locals and playing there just to see how it does. Honestly, I would like to play on Magic Arena, or not Magic Arena, Magic Online. But just didn't want to spend more money on, I guess, virtual cards um, and so and play tickets and stuff like that. And I do have an account on there, but I just never touch it because I don't have any cards. And so, I mean, I would love to be able to just test this deck out on there and show how my games go and learn more about the meta. But the only practice I'm getting right now is at my locals, and I mean, there's usually a decent amount of players. I think my biggest one I've been to so far has got like maybe 20 players or so, which is pretty good. But most of the time when I go out during the weekdays to play, it's usually like 8 to 10 people, so it's not that much um, variety I can play against, a variety of types of decks I can play against, and it's kind of like a small thing. So um, yeah, hopefully I'll get more games on it. Hopefully when COVID is over, if ever, we'll be able to be at higher capacity to play, and people would like to go out and you know play the game a bit more. Next off is Two Drown and Lock. This is essentially kind of our only real counter spell in the deck. I did play this deck with actual counter spells, but I found out I didn't really like it as much. The way I set up this mana base is that it's supposed to give me one of each color pretty quickly in the opening state of the game. Oftentimes I found that I couldn't get to 2 blue by turn 2 or even by turn 3. And so counterspell for me was oftentimes just dead in the hand. It wasn't really doing anything. And the way I play this deck is I'm trying to make it more of a mid-range deck versus a control deck, so I don't really want to be leaving my mana up open all the time just to counter what my opponent does. I'm trying to disrupt their game plans, sure, but with thought seizes and stuff like that rather than countering their stuff. Trying to disrupt their game plan with hand discarding. So oftentimes I'll be tapped out or something, or I just won't have the correct mana to cast counter spells, so I opt to not play any counter spell. So Drown and Lock is great. Blue, black we usually always have. So generally it's always live on turn 2 if we need to counter something. Modern is quite quick. people are fetching lands. We're playing a lot of hand disruption, so they will fill up their graveyard quite quick. We're not really playing against any big Earl decks. When Earl was the thing, this card was kind of bad against it because if they're escaping, you kind of lose your ability to play this card. Um, my meta, at least, there's not too many people playing Croxas, save for me and my friend who plays Jun. But yeah, Croxas is kind of rarity, and other decks that kind of uses their graveyard resources kind of a rarity. I mean, I've played against a couple of dredge decks and stuff like that, which is great for us. Like they'll fill their graveyard, but they do get their board out, and we do have to play a lot of graveyard hate, and so sometimes I just end up kind of either siding this card out or playing less copies. But yeah, you could definitely play more copies if you like. It's a very flexible card. It's a really good removal and counterspell card. What it's not great against is stuff like Amulet Titan or Tron, because they're not really playing any fetch lands to begin with, or at least Tron isn't, and a lot of their stuff is really big mana stuff like 7 mana, 6 mana, and oftentimes they're not playing that much removal, or they're not really filling up their graveyards that quickly, and so if this card is kind of dead against them, you're gonna be hitting like maybe their artifacts that they're playing to try to slow them down, like Expedition Map or something like that. So this card definitely a little bit worse in that matchup. Same thing with the rest of this. Being Grixis, we're having a little worse time against removing big stuff. And you'll see the next couple cards I play that's what I'm trying to fix and to answer with, is to have some sort of answer to deal with the big mana cards that otherwise Drown can't deal with, Fatal or Lightning Bolt. Great thing is, yeah, the Thoughtseizes can pseudo deal with some of the big mana stuff, but it's not always going to be a guarantee that you're going to have this in your hand by the time they are able to play it, or they have multiple copies of it and you can only answer one thing. So yeah, just the two drowns. You could up this count if you want, up to you here. So next thing here is Terminate. So this is why I mentioned earlier about dealing with big cards like a Murktide or something like that, where our Fatal pushes and our Lightning Bolts and maybe even our Drown Unlock cannot answer. This is going to be there to deal with that. Yeah, you need an answer to Titan. You need an answer to Warm Coil, for example, or just something like that. Things that you cannot deal with your low cost stuff, or low cost cheap removal like Lightning Bolt and whatnot. So I opted to play 2 Terminates. I was trying out Dreadbore, and Dreadbore is great, and it hits the Planeswalker, but sometimes it's just kind of I leave a mana open. There's been times where I leave a mana open, or they play something and I can't remove it. It kind of sucks, So I am trying out Terminate now, since it is instant speed, and it hits those big creatures that I need to get rid of in order to kind of safely play my turn out. And so yeah, 2 Terminate. I don't think you need more than 2. Technically you're playing four copies, because I am playing Snapcaster, so they can always snap these back if you need to. The not regenerating part is only really relevant to Affinity decks. Otherwise, I don't think there's any creatures that really regenerate. So yeah, it's kind of similar to Dam, but since we're not playing white, Dam's not too great in this deck. But this is instant speed, so this is pretty good for our colors here. Next is the reason why I feel like I could just play 21 lands and get away with it, is Expressive Alliteration. So Expressive here lets us dig through our deck 3 cards deep, lets us get 2 lands if we need 2 lands, lets us get 1 land, another card, or lets us get like 2 cheap cards that we can cast off of it, because we are playing a lot of cheap 1 mana cards. Speaking of that, Void of the Chalices, we're not really too weak against Void, namely because we play artifact removal. And a lot of our cards, we can, if they do try to avoid us, we can just kind of, they're all instant speeds. We're kind of just can just play it and not worry about it. So Expressive Liberation, one of the best draw cards, I guess, pseudo draw cards in the game. It nets you 2 cards for 2 mana, and lets you dig 3 cards deep, which is really good. And so I'm only playing 3 here because I think, being that I'm mid range, I don't want to sit there and draw, because it is sorcery speed, and so I gotta play it on my turn, draw, and do whatever. And having more than 3 will clog up your hands against certain matchups. Against matchup like aggro, you're not gonna really have the time to sit there and just dig through your deck for your cards. Um, and so I think 3 here is fine. And you're also playing Snapcaster, so technically you're playing more copies of this card anyways. Um, and against control matchups and stuff like that, this card is just pretty good. It's a 2 mana, um, 2 mana Archmage Charm, I guess. That's the equivalent of it. And so yeah, it's really flexible, really good card. Definitely one of my favorites so far. And yeah, next card here is the 3 Kogan's Command. So here, I think Kogan plays a better part in this meta than versus on Historic. Namely because the pinging 2 is more significant. There's a lot of other creatures and stuff you can ping for 2 damage. There's way more artifact being played in the format. And here we're playing Snapcaster, so this really synergizes well with Snapcaster. What I mean by that is there's times where you can just bring back the snap with the Kolagans, recycle them. The one of the I guess the the cool things you can do, like I guess the combat trick you can do is if this is in your grave, you can flash in a snap. Give this flashback, block with snap, let it go to the grave, and then cast the Kogan, grab the snap back, and force your opponent to discard a card or deal some damage. So yeah, that's kind of like the cool combat trick thing you can do with the Kogan's command. So it's a little bit better for me here to play 3, unlike my Historic deck where I only play 2, and I also play a Prismari command. Here you could technically play Prismari. Prismari is not too bad, but I opt to just play the 4 or the 3 Kolagans because we have the snaps to sort of combo off with it and some sort of synergy there. We're not too weak to artifact like Grabdigger's Cage. This will answer certain relics and the Soul Lantern, stuff like that we can answer. So yeah, I think 3 is pretty good. Best case scenario, if you're playing against an artifact deck, they play an artifact creature, and they have a 2 mana, another 2 mana creature. You can 2-for-1 them. So this card is really good, really easy to 2-for-1, maybe sometimes more than that. And so definitely, I think this should be either play in 3 or 2 ofs if you're gonna be playing Grixis colors that are using snaps and stuff. Next, I just have the 1 of Force of Negation. Namely, I'm only playing 1 of it because I only have 1. But outside of that, we're usually not casting this card for its mana value. We're not usually playing the 2 blue and the colorless, unlike Counterspell. Here we're playing this to kind of protect our board, or develop board, and perhaps protect our Planeswalker or something like that. Unfortunately, in my meta, a lot of it is aggro, and so a lot of their decks are creature-based decks, and so I don't really get the chance to play against too many control decks, and so Force Negation is generally a blowout against most control mirror matches, but we are more of a mid-range deck anyway, so I don't feel the need to play more than 1 or 2 Force Negations. Maybe 2 copies is great, fine. We're not really plussing that hard. We don't really have Archmage Charms to kind of refill our hands. We do have the expressives though, which is great to refill our hands. But at the same time, I'm not playing that many blue cards per se with blue casting costs. Unlike my Esper deck, where I'm playing almost all the cards that I play have a blue casting cost, so Force Negation is probably really good in that deck. I opt not to play Force in Esper because I feel like um, I didn't need to, except for like in the mirror matches, I would probably side it in. But like I said, I only have one, so I'm not gonna really bother trying to get more right now. Um, and so yeah, just that one. Um, yeah, let's see. Just looking through my deck to see how many blue cards I have. So yeah, I mean, there's still a few in here, and there's still a few more in here. But yeah, I think just the one here is just fine. Oftentimes I'm just holding this card in my hand, and oftentimes I'm using this card against Blood Moon. Anyways, there's a lot of Blood Moon decks in my meta. My friend also plays like Blue Moon, so I get plenty of practice against that. Um, he my people in my local love to play Cascading Blood Moon and or Magnus the Moon and stuff like that. So this is namely to kind of stop that from happening, from getting Blood Moon when we're tapped out. So yeah. Next card here is I'm playing the one Lily of the Veil. Yeah, she's a fantastic Planeswalker. Definitely one of the best Planeswalker in the format. Um, Great +1, great -1. Her Edict ability. That's what I namely use her for, is for edicting. Um, um, AKA just sacrificing something. Normally hitting something that I can't deal with. So like something that's big or something that has indestructible or protection. That's what I'm using her namely for. And she's also there to kind of feed Croxa with the cards in my hand, like dead lands or some other dead form of removal. Like if I don't need fatal pushes, or I don't need lightning bolts, or I don't need whatever, I can feed Croxa with her, which is great. I have ulted her with her a few times. Usually it's not game winning, but it does set our opponent back far enough so that we can get ahead again. So there's that. The reason I'm only playing one is in this deck I'm not really generating advantage too much all the time in terms of getting like a +1 card draw every turn. She's definitely really good in Jund, where you pair her up with a Ren in 6 and a fetch land or something. You can fetch and get back your land and force discard that land with Lily, and just keep basically they synergize off of each other, and that's great. In my deck here, we don't really have that that ability to kind of generate that kind of resource for us to be able to uptick Lily every turn. I mean, there are times where I'm able to just kind of have an empty hand, play everything I have on board, and just uptick her and force my opponent to discard, which is great. But yeah, just the one Lily here, and I only have one copy, and I really do like this box topper Lily. Maybe one day I'll show off all my Planeswalker collection, because I do have quite a bit of Planeswalker, and I really like them as a card and their looks. Yeah, so now on to the next card. This is the main reason I play this deck, is for Bolus. I really absolutely love Bolus, and am playing 4 copies of him. That might be too much, and it might be too expensive for the format, but I mean, this deck is more or less sort of a casual deck to kind of play a few games here and there at a local, and I'm not expecting to take this deck to a GP and win it or anything like that. So so the main reason I play for Bolus here is his casting cost is real easy in this deck. It's one of each color, which we always have. He's a great threat. When he comes into the battlefield, he forces your opponent to discard, which is usually bad. Not many decks like discarding, I guess, unless you're like Dredge or something, or like a Lurrus deck or something like that. But yeah, so they force him to discard, and if they need to essentially answer him. I mean, he does have flying, which is great, so he does have the ability to clock our opponents, and he threatens them with the flipping ability. So if we're late in the game or we're top decking, this is a fantastic top deck. Like I absolutely love top decking. Um, Bolus when I can, and playing him and seeing him, even having multiple like two copies in my hand is it's great. You can always play him, play another one, and you're not really losing a card by playing that legendary, or you can loop with him, which is also cool. But basically, he's just a flexible card. He's strong against cards like Lightning Bolt. They will have to Lightning Bolt him twice or do something or whatever to get rid of him. He can block most things in the game safely and survive, which is great. He can block Darcy, Ragavan, and some other cards. What he doesn't do too well against is crashing foothill decks, because the Rhinos are 4/4s. But he still can kill one Rhino if you really needed to block with it. Doesn't feel super terrible because you are forcing your opponent to discard a card, so you kind of come out even with him. And he's a threat late game with his flipping ability. There, almost every game that I was able to flip him when we got to that point, I have won. Despite being a mid-range deck, this deck still somewhat has difficulties closing out the game. And so, if I'm having that difficulty, or if we're going to that late into the turns, then him flipping and going off, my opponent can usually not come back from that. So that's why we're playing 4 copies. I don't mind him using him as trump blocking. I don't mind, having him in the graveyard, because cool thing about him, even though he's got 2 sides to him. Show you the other side. They're both considered different legendaries, and so oftentimes in a lot of my games, if you've seen me play on historic, or even here in modern, I've done it a few times, where I would flip him and then just spend 4 mana to revive another copy. So basically, it kind of puts my opponent in sort of an ultimatum, whether they need to kill this one or need to kill this one, sort of thing, when you revive them. And so what generally happens is that they'll see that they don't want me to draw 2 cards next turn, they'll get rid of this, but I'll end up just reinvesting my mana again, flipping him, and then reviving the one that they just killed. I've done that a few times. That combo is generally only really weak against, I want to say, Brazen Borrower, because it is an active ability at sorcery speed, so it kind of sucks if they Brazen Borrow you while you spend 7 mana to flip this thing. But that often doesn't really happen. Most of the time, you're able to safely activate the card, flip it, and still maintain priority to go ahead and use one of its loyalty abilities. And that of its own is generally game winning. So yeah, that's the main reason why I decided to play Grixis Color, was for this card, especially when he was in the format in the M19 M19 error to M20. I had a lot of fun playing with Bolus, and so I decided to kind of make it a mainstay in a lot of my decks, both in Pioneer, Historic, and in Modern. And obviously he's not a super duper competitive card, but I love just playing it, and just kind of like when you get to flip him, you kind of wow your opponent. They're like, dang, you managed to do that. So yeah, that's the main reason I play this deck. And the second one is gonna be the 5 mana Planeswalker here, the I guess baby Bolus here. He's really good. I would say one of the best Planeswalker in the game, if you manage to resolve him, because he can win the game on his own. He's a bit expensive to play, and his pretty restrictive casting cost. I mean, it's 5 mana, and every mana you need a color for. So he's a little difficult to play, but he's fantastic. He's one of the only Planeswalkers that I know of that essentially nets you 2 cards every time you uptick. Outside of this one where you flip it for 7 mana, but this one you force your opponent to exile, and you draw a card, which is great. The combo I often do with this deck is I'll flip him. If he's in the graveyard, I'll flip him and revive one of these from the grave, and go off from there. So that's great. Um, you don't often use his -3. I mean, worst case scenario, if you're down on cards and you guys are top decking and your opponent has a threat, you can always play him -3, get rid of the Planeswalker, get rid of the creature, and hopefully he stays on the board. He will survive a Rhino. If you have one of these and Bolus, you can trump block one of the Rhinos and take 4 to him and still have him for next turn to uptick and hopefully get a removal spell like a fatal push or something to deal with the other Rhino. In general, I guess I would say is there's a lot of Rhino decks in my meta, and I've done pretty well against all of them. Um, I think I generally 2-0 them unless they get a crazy hand or unless they can cast a Blood Moon on me and lock me out of the game essentially. But yeah, um, I guess this deck is pretty decent against most cascading decks, but we're kind of weak to some aggro and control decks. So, but yeah, in general, so far I've had a pretty good experience with this deck in the modern format, despite it being kind of a weird mashup of cards and a lot of it is not relevant to the meta. Like no one's really playing this type of Grixis deck in modern because it is kind of slow and it is kind of not super duper powerful, but it's fun to play. So next over, we're gonna go ahead and go over the lands hopefully really quickly, and I know this video is already kind of going on long, but I'm gonna try to close out pretty soon. So colors in this deck are super important. So we're playing the 5 shocks here. I was playing an extra Steam event, but I did decide to take it out because I think I had enough cards to dig through my deck, and I was finding out that I was kind of flooding out actually. So decided to kind of maintain a very small mana base here, and like I mentioned before, this deck can operate on a very low land count, and you can try to reach your stall essentially if you need to reach your 4th and 5th mana. In my Esper deck, it's a little bit different. You're having it's a little bit more harder to stall because some of the cards in there are a lot more expensive to cast and play. Especially like and the mana is a bit more restrictive. So in this deck, a lot of stuff just costs 1 mana or 2 mana, and you should be able to operate this deck on even just 2 lands if necessary, until you get to the point where you can start drawing your lands. So yeah, just the 5 shocks here. Not much to say. They are painful. I mean, you do fetch and shock a lot, so just gotta be, that's just the nature of the game. You have to be okay with using your resource, putting yourself closer to death and closer to bolt range, I guess, with every passing turn that you do fetch and shock, or just fetch, or even just shocking cards in and playing Thoughtseize. So that's the one thing that you could kind of change about the deck, is to maybe play less shocks, or don't play the Thoughtseizes to make sure that you aren't within bolting range, I guess, because bolt is a very popular card, so you should expect that your opponent can burn you out by, if they're playing red at all, they should be able to kill you if you aren't too careful there. Next off, I'm just playing 3 Checklands. Might bump this up to 2. I don't know too much, but yeah, like I mentioned, colors are very important. You need one of every color in this deck to kind of play the deck, and I'll kind of talk about that as we get to some other cards here. In terms of Fetchlands, I'm playing just 8, which is still a lot for this deck. I'm playing the 4 polluted because for sure we need blue and black. Our deck is heavily blue and black, especially black, and these are kind of just flexible spots. Sorry for the glare here, but it's basically just 3 Tarns. So the reason why I opt to not play 4 Tarns is we don't really have that many Izzet cards in our deck to play, or we don't really need just the red and red or mountain or island card as much if we are under threat of Blood Moon. Which is why I'm playing the Bloodstain. So in case if we're playing against a deck that is representing Blood Moon, then we should be able to hopefully fetch our get our black mana base up with the swamps and stuff before they are able to cast a Blood Moon. So there is reason to stand that we can even play two Bloodstained Mires and just the two Tarns. But I only have one Bloodstain that's extra right now, so that's why I'm playing that. I do have a fourth Tarn, but I figured to kind of mix and match them up a little bit to do 4, 3, 1 rather than just playing 4, 4. So that's that. I'll kind of explain the next 5 cards here, which is the basics here. So as I mentioned, this is entirely up to you. My meta, quite a few people play Blood Moon, so I do need a way to play my deck under Blood Moon. And granted, Blood Moon as a deck in general, or as a card in general, is not as popular as it used to be, because with Earl being gone and Scape Shift Titan and stuff like that not being that popular anymore, Blood Moon does see less play. But just in my meta, there's always gonna be a Blood Moon player, and I always have to expect to be able to resolve my cards or be able to fetch these out with my Fetchlands in order to play the game. It doesn't hurt as much because I do play red cards, so I can still use the red mana that the moon does give. Unlike my Esper deck, where if they resolve a Blood Moon, I'm essentially just dead in the water. I can't use the red mana at all, and I'm just kind of locked out of the game. I often like the five colors here. With these 5 colors, I can essentially cast all the cards in my deck, even under Blood Moon, except for 2 cards. The only 2 cards I cannot cast would be the Boluses, since they do require triple black. I have no way of getting a third black color unless I play a third black swamp or something. Everything else is just 1 mana of each color, except for, I think, yeah, right here, Lily and Force Negation. Like I said, Force Negation, great card. You can just discard a exile a blue card and still play it, so it doesn't really get affected by Blood Moon. Lily doesn't really matter too much. I'm only playing 1 copy of her, so I could care less if I only have 1 swamp and can't cast her. It's not the end of the world. But definitely the cards that will be dead in our hands if Blood Moon resolves is going to be the Boluses, which I would be okay with. I definitely need 2 islands, I would say, under Blood Moon, just because I want to be able to snap a caster, cast Snapcaster, and maybe cast like an Expressive, or Snapcaster, cast like a Consider, something like that. So that's why I opt to play the 2 Blood Moon, so that I can do this combination without it being kind of like dead in the water, I guess. Which is why I opt to play two island, and the fact that maybe I'll discard an island or something, or whatever, or they kill an island with like a land destruction. I'm gonna need a second copy of an island to try to cast my blue spells. Cards that I can often always cast under Blood Moon would be like this, with the Bolus. I only need these 2 cards, and obviously 2 other lands. It doesn't really matter, but as long as I have a swamp and an island, I can always cast Bolus under Blood Moon, which is great. That's the idea here, is to be able to cast this. I should be able to also flip it, if I needed to. So that's great. Let me think here. Anything else? Yeah, Drown and Lock, Counterspell, Snaps. Yeah, so 2 blacks, definitely 2 swamps, so you can cast Croxas under Blood Moon, which is fine. And obviously sometimes you need an extra swamp or something to play, like a Thoughtseize or a Fatal Push. But yeah, so I kind of designed this deck to try to combat Blood Moon, or try to play around Blood Moon a little bit. Granted, these don't always give the colors that you need. I mean, having this sometimes it makes Croxa more difficult to cast if you have like four 4 lands and you have like one of them being an island, you're just not gonna be able to cast Croxa on turn 4 at that point, you know. But that's just something you kind of have to live with. But you can, you know, cast Croxa a little bit later. That's fine. Um, there's an argument to play some of the whatchamacallit, the um, color fixing lands like the Cavern or the um, Sunken Ruins or something like that, to kind of give these colors, give these lands a dual color. I did try them out, and they're fine. But I ended up feeling like I didn't really need them as much, especially since I'm playing the Checklands and the shocks and stuff like that. Didn't feel like the color fixing lands really did too much for me. Um, Unlike color fixing in my Esper deck, I think color fixing in my Esper deck you definitely need, like, you know, triple blue, double blue. They're very hard cards to invest in. Where in this deck, I can almost cast every card with just one of each color. So, you know, that's fine. To not play any of the filter lands. Next off, gonna be my side deck here, and I got this off at a Comic Con, so I use these as dividers while they're in my deck box. So that's why I always have my side deck behind these Dark Stalker cards. They're really cool. I really like them. The kind of centerpiece of my deck sometimes. Big fan of Darkstalkers when I was a kid, and going into Marvel vs. Capcom and stuff like that. I actually have the other one. I think I showed off before. This one was in my Esper deck, and I also have a third one. This one is so these two I got at Comic Con. They're pretty cool. I was there judging for Yu-Gi-Oh, so on one of my off days, I managed to go to one of the booths that had these and sold them or bought them for a pretty good price. And I think apparently these are limited. They're to like 500 a piece or something like that. And I looked on eBay, and these are quite expensive. I think they're like $300 per one. And it's like, oh, I didn't plan on selling mine because, you know, they're kind of cool, neat to collect, and I like the character. This one I also think I bought this one off of eBay, because this one you can only get as part of a promotion for one of their T-shirts or something like that. And I think these are from what looks like Udon Collectibles. I think, yeah, Udon Collectibles. And so yeah, they're just kind of cool metal cards that I use as dividers. I use them in Yu-Gi-Oh for as centerpieces, or field centers as we call them. You kind of put them in the middle here and essentially play around it, because in Yu-Gi-Oh you have zones and they're kind of important. Magic, not so much. I just kind of usually have my deck here and kind of put my side deck with this on top of it to the side somewhere, and when I side out and stuff, I kind of use this to remind myself that that's my side deck, and so I'm just kind of shove all my cards in there. But anyways, enough of that. I'm just going to put this to the side here. I'm going to go through my side deck really quickly, hopefully. I got 2 Explosive Engineerings, really good flexible card. This is one of our only ways of dealing with enchantments and artifacts. And so, you know, you're gonna and it's also one of the only mass board wipes that I do play. Great against Rhino. You pay 2 mana, or you play this for 0, pay 2 mana, kill all the rhinos, or pay 1 mana, kill all like the amulets, kill you know, lantern control, stuff like that. So 2 explosive. You could probably play more than 2. You could probably play 3. I was trying out 3, but I was kind of feel like my side deck was a little cloggy, so I opted just to play 2, but might bump it up to 3 again. We'll see. Spell Bomb for Graveyard Hate. Real good. You know, you sack it, you pay an extra black, and you draw a card. So do need some Graveyard Hate. A lot of the popular decks in Modern use the grave like ours. So yeah. 1 Alpine Moon. I probably should bump this up to 2, maybe even 3 even. Just to hit like Urza Saga and stuff like that, or even Tron Lands. I only have the 1 copy because I only have 1. I might try to pick up another one to play. It's similar to is it Spreading Seas? I mean, you could play Spreading Seas over this, or even in combination with each other. I do have extra Spreading Seas, so maybe I'll just throw in Spreading Seas, in addition to the Alpine Moon. But yeah, really cool, flexible card. Um, Definitely for 1 mana, it's real good. Next, I have 2 Inquisition. So this is kind of just kind of an optional thing. Um, Sometimes I go real hard and I go almost like a whack 8 sort of style deck where I'm just trying to 1-for-1 my opponent, and then top deck like a Bolus, top deck Croxa, or like, make sure they have no cards left in their hand, Croxa from my graveyard, and start clocking them down with Croxa. So yeah, that's why I'm playing the 2 Inquisitions. Sometimes I side out all 4 Thoughtseize, put these 2 instead if my opponent is playing a Lurrus deck or something like that. Low curve. Or if I feel like I'm playing against a control and I need more answers to their counter spells to kind of safely cast my card, I'll go ahead and play this. This entire deck in general is kind of weak to Summoner's Spell, or Summoner's Veil, or Summoner's Veil of Summer. Sorry, I was getting confused there. So yeah, Veil of Summer, or Summer. Sorry, I get a little confused here. Let me. Summers of Veil, or Veil of Summers. I forget. Anyways, that's just the nature of being a blue and black deck. You kind of, they play that and you kind of just roll your eyes like, okay, cool. I saw that one coming from a mile away. So be careful when you play against green decks. They'll probably gonna side out against you. But yeah, you can force discarding with Croxa and Bolus instead. You might not even want to play this against them. But yeah, I like the Inquisitions. Also, the reason why I play the Inquisitions and the Thoughtseize is for Delphi. Delphi I've won by Thoughtseizing in Ugamog, or Thoughtseizing something real big, and be able to cast it next turn for free. Also great graveyard hate. Also a great clocker. If you opponent isn't really doing anything, you can basically keep attacking with this thing. You really kind of don't want to sometimes, but if it's basically unblockable, unless they have a Delphi of their own. But you swing in, deal 3, whatever they're discarding, or whatever you're forcing them to discard, get value off the Delphi. Probably a good argument to say that you could even main deck this if you wanted to. Main deck it or play more copies in the side. Works really well with Thoughtseizes. So one of my favorite cards to play right now in Modern. Definitely. Aethergus, kind of our answer to Blood Moon, and our answer to Cascade decks and stuff like that. Answer to kind of Veil Summoner also. If they try to Veil Summoner and you have this, cool, whatever. This Veil Summoner doesn't protect them against this. Sorry, I keep saying Veil of Summoners, but it's Veil of Summers or whatever. I kind of get confused with my Yu-Gi-Oh card sometimes, but yeah, still a good card. Still good pseudo counter spell, pseudo removal. Do see a lot of green decks in my area, so yeah. Next is gonna be 3 Mystical Disputes. I opt to play 3 of these rather than more Force of Negations and stuff like that, because I don't want to really minus myself too much. And this is still good against other blue decks. And for 1 mana you can kind of like hard cast your Bolus and kind of try to push it through with the Mystical Disputes. And overall it's a great card, and you can even side it. You can even just play it normally against non-blue cards. Pay the 3 mana, force them to counter it. So still a really good card. Yeah. Last card here is kind of whatever you want it to be honest, or it could be like another Alpine Moon. It could be whatever. I just kind of have it as a flexible spot. I namely use him against I guess against aggro decks, against burn decks. Granted, he's a little slow, but he is kind of a blowout card. Obviously, you kind of don't want to have him and a Delphi on board. If you, with Magic ruling is with replacement effects, your opponents can choose which replacement effect they're gonna apply to their card. Most of the time, if you have a Delphi and a Void I guess either way it's kind of good for you. But like if you had like this and like a uh, this and a let's say a Leyline of the Void or something, they're probably gonna choose to replace the replacement effect of Leyline of the Void, so you don't get value off of either cards. But not the worst thing if you have these two on the board. But yeah, basically it turns your removal spell, which we play a lot of in this deck, turns your removal spell into a zombie and you get value out of that. It's our only form of actually gaining some health. There's Burn has made quite a resurgence in the meta. So you might even want to play Dragon Claw instead of this card against Burn, because once you play Dragon Claw, you are playing a bunch of red cards too. So you'll be healing every time you're casting like a Bolus or a Lightning Bolt, or if they're casting Lightning Bolts against against your face or something like that, you're healing off of that. You're making their cards 30% weaker against you. So Dragon Claw might be a good idea to play if you have some of that. If you play two Dragon Claws, you're essentially negating their entire deck. But they'll probably be playing, I would think, some artifact removal if they're playing a red deck. But then again, who would side in artifact removal against this deck? Considering we're a mid-range control aggro deck sort of thing. So no one should really be playing artifact removal against us. I think over here I have some optional cards you can kind of play, so I kind of pulled out. So fourth Snapcaster, could play Counterspell if you wanted to try Opt, Thought Scour. You can play more removal of like Planeswalker if your meta has a lot of that. I was playing Jace for a bit, and he's great. There's a lot of times where I flip him and got a lot of value out of him. But he is a little weak to fatal pushes, and he's weak to lightning bolts, stuff like that. So I took him out of the deck for now. And I think I'm playing. What am I playing? I'm playing Search for Skanta instead of him, since Search for Skanta is a little bit more difficult to interact with. But he was great. He was also, I guess I ran into similar issues, is that him and Snapcaster kind of conflict with each other because they both want to cast the same card that you have in your graveyard. And so it's cool that you get to filter your cards in your hand, but bad that most of the time you're casting at sorcery speed if you're playing him. You can't play him and a counterspell, but you can play a Snap and a counterspell. It would be fine. Snap and a fatal push or something like that. So yeah, I ended up cutting him from the deck, but he's still really good I would say in Pioneer. I still play him in my Pioneer version of this deck, which maybe one day I'll make a video on that. Unfortunately, Pioneer is essentially dead in my area. I can't really find anywhere to play. There are a few shops that do play it, but they're like an hour away from me, so I don't really feel like driving there just to play Pioneer. So maybe the new Pioneer Challenger decks will revive Pioneer, which would be cool. I really do like Pioneer. I do like the fact that it's a slower format. You got the ability to play more expensive cards without having to feel like you're on a clock, because with Modern, it's a 3-turn clock essentially. You have 3 turns to kind of set up your board, and the game is just that fast. Like you got Tron, you have Amulet Titans and stuff like that, which makes the format that quick. So you're not always gonna be able to play some of your cool, expensive, flashy spells. Yeah, I did play Jason this deck a little bit, but I opted to take him out because I'm not really playing control. When I first built this deck, I was trying to build it more towards control. Found out that it didn't work as well as I wanted it to because it was kind of clunky. So I decided to sort of streamline it to make it more of a mid-range deck rather than control, I guess. But there are still a lot of control aspects about the deck. You can even gut out some of the cards like the Boluses. You can gut out those cards and put even faster cards in there to make it even more mid-rangey. Play more snaps. You can play more cantrips and stuff like that to make the deck even better. You can even make the deck, convert the entire deck to a Lure store of build, where you can play Mishra's Baubles, you can play Luris, you can play Ragavan, you can play Darcy, stuff like that. You can put more counter spells. There's a whole lot of ways to kind of build this deck, but I've chosen to kind of focus on um, building it around Bolus and kind of going from there. Anyways, I think this is quite long of a video. Don't really do any edits or cuts. I kind of just blabber for a good hour, and yeah, hopefully you guys learn something. If not, then no worries. Anyways, see you guys next time. I may come back for the Pioneer deck, or am I doing some Yu-Gi-Oh stuff? We'll see. Wherever I feel like it, or whatever I have time for. Anyways, see you guys later.